The crowd had gathered, restless but hopeful. It was February 21st, 1965. They came to hear a man who didn't just speak truth, he embodied it. But in a sudden flurry of bullets, silence fell. Blood stained the floor of the Audubon ballroom, and with it, the voice of Malcom X was silenced. Or was it? Because from that silence rose a fire, one that still burns in every cry for justice, in every fight for freedom. This is not just the story of a man. It's the story of a movement, and it starts right here. Before he became Malcolm X, he was Malcolm Little, a boy born into a storm of injustice. Born in Omaha, Nebraska, in 1925, Malcolm entered a world where skin color could determine your fate. His father, Earl Little, was a proud follower of Marcus Garvey, preaching black pride and self-reliance. But in America, such pride came with a cost. Their home was no stranger to threats. The Littles were forced to move often, hounded by white supremacists who burned their house down and ultimately took Earl's life. The official story claimed it was an accident, but the family knew better. His body crushed by a streetcar was no accident. It was a warning, a declaration of war on black dignity. Malcolm's mother, Louise, tried to hold the family together, but poverty and trauma took their toll. She was eventually committed to a mental institution, and the children were scattered into foster care. The system told Malcolm he had limits. When he said he wanted to be a lawyer, a teacher told him to be realistic and aim for carpentry instead. That moment cut deep, stripped of stability. Malcolm absorbed the message America was shouting at him. You are less. But inside, a spark remained, a defiance, a hunger. He began to see the hypocrisy, the lies, the daily violence dressed as normal life. The boy called Little was growing, and so was his fury. This chapter in Malcolm's life wasn't just about pain. It was the forging of a rebel. The world tried to break him. Instead, it built him into a mirror for America to see its own reflection. And soon, that mirror would speak, loudly. By the time Malcolm hit his teenage years, the softness of childhood had hardened into sharp edges. Kicked around by the system, dismissed by schools, and disillusioned by a country that offered him no place, he hit the streets, hungry not just for survival, but for power, identity, and escape. Boston welcomed him with neon lights and fast talk. It was the 1940s, and young black men like Malcolm found their hustle where they could. He slicked back his hair with lye and dubbed himself Detroit Red, a name as sharp as his style and as fast as his hustle. He sold drugs, ran numbers, danced in clubs, and carried a gun, not out of malice, but necessity. In a world that offered no protection, you learned to protect yourself. But the glitz was an illusion. In 1946, Malcolm was caught during a burglary and sentenced to 10 years in prison. Society had found its way to lock him up, just as it had locked out his father, his family, and his dreams. Alone with his thoughts and surrounded by bars, Detroit Red could have disappeared forever. But prison became his university. He devoured books with a desperate hunger, philosophy, history, religion. He rewrote every word in the dictionary by hand, unlocking not just language but a new understanding of power. Letters from his siblings introduced him to the teachings of Elijah Muhammad and the Nation of Islam. Suddenly, Malcolm saw his past with clarity, not as failure, but as preparation. He had been blind, but now he could see. Detroit Red died behind those bars. But in his place, something far more dangerous was born, a mind sharpened by knowledge, fueled by rage and ready to challenge a nation. Malcolm X was rising. When Malcolm X walked out of prison in 1952, he wasn't just a free man. He was a man on a mission. The Nation of Islam had given him purpose, a name, and a cause. No longer Little, no longer Red. He became X, symbolizing the unknown African name stolen from his ancestors. And with that name, he embraced a new fire. Under the guidance of Elijah Muhammad, Malcolm rose like a storm. He was charismatic, disciplined, and electrifying on the mic. While other ministers spoke with calm reason, Malcolm struck like thunder. He called out white America not with politeness, but with piercing truth. The white man is a devil, he declared, not metaphorically, but as a diagnosis of centuries of oppression. Crowds grew, cameras followed, and the world began to take notice. To black America, Malcolm was a voice that finally said what needed to be said. To white America, he was dangerous, too bold, too angry, too unafraid. But Malcolm didn't care. He wasn't after approval. He was after liberation. Yet, behind the public fire, tension was building. Malcolm's fame began to rival that of Elijah Muhammad. Whispers of jealousy, of betrayal, began to rise. When Malcolm discovered that Elijah, whom he revered, had fathered secret children with young followers, it shattered his trust. The man who had once saved him now stood on shaky ground. Then came the breaking point. Malcolm's comments after the assassination of President Kennedy. "The chickens have come home to roost," he said. The nation silenced him. And in that silence, Malcolm began to see his own cage. He had lit the torch of the nation. Now, he would carry that flame beyond its walls. The world had heard the nation's Malcom X. But the man who would walk alone, he was just beginning to speak. In 1964, Malcolm X stood at a crossroads, alone, exiled from a nation of Islam and shadowed by threats. But rather than retreat, he took flight, literally. His journey to Mecca would become a spiritual rebirth and a turning point that redefined not just his mission, but his message to the world. It was his first time leaving the United States, and what he witnessed in the holy city shook his foundation. There, in the white-robed Ram, he stood beside Muslims of all colors, Arabs, Africans, Asians, and Europeans, praying to the same God. No hatred, no superiority, no racism. He wrote letters home in awe. "I have eaten from the same plate, drank from the same cup, and slept on the same bed with people whose eyes were the bluest of blue, whose hair was the blondest of blonde, and whose skin was the whitest of white. But we were all one." The man who once preached that all white people were devils now saw the enemy not as a race, but as a system. He did renounce his past. He refined it. He returned with a new name, El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz. And with it, a broader vision of black liberation, not just for African Americans, but for oppressed people everywhere. He formed new organizations, the Muslim Mosque Incorporated and the Organization of Afro-American Unity, calling for human rights, international solidarity, and revolution through knowledge and empowerment. But enlightenment came with danger. The more powerful Malcolm became, now with a global lens and rising influence, the more enemies he gathered. He was no longer just a minister. He was a movement, and that movement was gaining momentum. But so were the shadows following him. By 1965, Malcolm X knew his time was running out. The threats were no longer just whispers. They were real, and they were closing in. His home was firebombed. He was being watched, tracked, and followed. Still, he refused to back down. "If I die," he said, "it will be doing what I believe in." He had become more than a man. He was a voice, a symbol, a target. His words had outgrown the nation of Islam, outgrown America, and were now resonating around the globe. In speeches, he challenged the United Nations to recognize the oppression of black Americans as a human rights issue. He met with African leaders, Caribbean revolutionaries, and Arab thinkers. He was building a worldwide coalition for black dignity. But that vision came at a price. On February 21st, 1965, Malcolm arrived at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem to address the Organization of Afro-American Unity. He was calm, even though he'd told his wife, Betty, that he didn't expect to live much longer. As he greeted the crowd, chaos erupted. Gunfire rang out. In seconds, Malcolm was shot multiple times in front of his wife and children. The assassins thought they were ending something. Instead, they ignited something bigger. Malcolm X died at just 39. But in that short span, he transformed himself from a street hustler into one of the most fearless voices of the 20th century. He challenged America to confront its soul, and he paid the ultimate price. He once said, "If you're not ready to die for it, put the word freedom out of your vocabulary." Malcolm didn't just speak those words. He lived them. And though he fell in that ballroom, the fire he lit still burns. Malcolm X's story is not just history. It's prophecy. It's the voice that still echoes in protest chants, in classrooms, in movements that refuse to die. He showed us that transformation is possible, that truth is power, and that courage sometimes means standing alone. From Lil X to El Hajj Malik El-Shabazz, his life was a journey through pain, discovery, and purpose. He didn't just fight racism, he exposed it. He didn't just demand justice, he became the demand. If Malcolm's fire lit something in you today, don't let it fade. Subscribe to this channel for more stories that challenge, inspire, and speak truth to power. The struggle continues, and so does the story.